Hello and welcome to a snowbound Total Soccer Show. I am Daryl Grove and I'm joined by a man who is always Division 1 in my books. It's Taylor Rockwell. Hello. A lot going on in that intro there.
Yeah, I know. There really was. And it's been all very praising of me lately, all the introductions. I feel like that's going to swing the opposite direction pretty soon.
I'm just trying to keep your spirits up. I
appreciate that. In these cold, dark times.
Yeah, so we're not in the office today. Basically, no, Richmond, Virginia is iced over. We there's no good travel route to the office, so we're both recording from home.
We are, and I kind of forgot that we have two cars, my wife and I, because as soon as it was snowing, we have a friend, Jim Riddick. Hi, Jim, if you're listening, who I saw his Facebook post about how you should always snubble the show right away before it hardens. Yeah. So I did that. I shoveled the walk. I shoveled my wife's car. Forgot I had a car, and that thing is now covered in snow and ice. So we'll see how that goes. It's kind of a nice mobile.
Maybe you're Division 2 now. Maybe you're Division 2.
Yeah, that's probably deserved.
The big news that broke sort of late Friday is that US Soccer finally made sort of a decision about the USL and NASL sanctioning, and they've awarded provisional Division 2 sanctioning to both USL and the NASL.
I believe the press release said, oh, come on, that definitely counts as an attempt to figure this out, right? Come on.
So we're going to get into detail on this on today's show, but not with each other, Taylor. I've recorded an interview with Jeff Reuter from 55.1, a website that really broke a lot of the news during the long waiting period between US Soccer's deliberations and their final decision.
I mean, Daryl, we just all have different definitions of what mid-December really is. Maybe they just don't conform to our conventional calendars.
It was supposed to be early December.
Or early December, either way.
So, obviously we've got some other stuff to talk about first, but later on today's show, there's a very detailed interview with Jeff all about the NASL and USL, so look forward to that.
There we are.
First up, Taylor, we're going to do a sort of scouting network update / FA Cup update, because the two were kind of intermingled this weekend, right?
That works for me.
There's also, before we even get to that, there's FIFA news as well.
There it is.
Everybody's wearing bow ties. It's the FIFA awards are happening right now. I want to say I'm kind of not into it, but I guess if we have to recap the news. It's Cristiano Ronaldo is best player in the world, which he kind of already knew because he won the Ballon d'Or last month instead, right? The big American news: Carli Lloyd is the best FIFA women's player.
Yeah, she decidedly not wearing a bow tie there, Mr. Grove. That is kind of the reason why we are discussing this, right? I mean, all credit to Claudia Ranieri and Cristiano Ronaldo. I forget who won the Women's Coach of the Year. I believe it was the German national team coach.
It was, Nade.
But, I think we're probably talking about this because it's Carli Lloyd and because it seemed like the internet, specifically Twitter, was very confused by this win for Carli Lloyd. Back-to-back wins for her.
So there's maybe a bit of maybe leftover glow from the 2015 Women's World Cup performance.
I think so. I read the blurb, the FIFA blurb about not necessarily why she had won it, but describing her accolades, and it was a consistent year for her. And yes, they were eliminated in the quarterfinals or whatever it was, but she continued to perform well and is a strong performer for the national team. Yeah,
and it's even Houston Dash I know didn't do that well this season, and her stats in NWSL were not what you would expect. I mean, she was missing for a lot of it, right, for national team games and this and that. But I really feel like this is not sort of. I'd say Carli Lloyd did not perform to her maximum ability because we saw what that looked like in 2015. So it's kind of an odd award. I'd recommend Kevin McCauley's article on Stars and Stripes FC. He has a good sort of breakdown of maybe who would have been more deserving winners. But how about just as US fans, we just take all the awards we can grab?
I am fine with that.
My favorite,
congratulations, Carli.
Oh, yeah. And my favourite tweet about this came from the American Outlaws. Their main account was Carli Lloyd, FIFA Women's Best Player of the Year, photographed with a fan. And the fan was Cristiano Ronaldo, also with his award.
That's better than what Gabriel Batistuta said. So, let's stick with that.
Shall we move on to our scouting network / FA Cup updates?
That'll work for me.
Can we start, in terms of FA Cup updates, with the big story? I want to say we're going to spend an hour, maybe 3 hours on this.
I know what you're doing.
Stoke City 0, Wolverhampton Wanderers Football Club 2.
I knew it was coming. It still made me chuckle. Well done, my friend. And well done the Wolves. That's right. Yeah. I called them the Wolves just to annoy you.
No, that's fine. I love calling them the Wolves. Come on, you, the Wolves. Hello, Ellie, in the background.
She's just letting her presence be known. She is not a Wolves fan. She's made that decidedly clear, apparently.
Even though she's descended from them. So Wolves beat Stoke 2-0. goals from Costa and Doherty. There was, somewhat Scouting Network related, a young man made his debut for Wolves, Morgan Gibbs-White, the youngest ever Wolves player. I'm going to look to add him to the TSS Scouting Network in the very near future.
I like it, and I would mock the idea of like somebody signing up to be a Wolves scoutee, but I feel like you've got some people out there who love you, care about you, want you to be happy, and so maybe there's some people out there who want a Wolves player just so they can have a team to follow along with you.
Hey, Class 1 Academy. It's a Class 1 Academy.
There we go. There we go.
Elsewhere, Richie Garcia scouting Emerson Hyndman. Emerson Hyndman actually made an appearance for Bournemouth in the FA Cup.
You did. And Richie sent us, he sent us two different scouting reports. The one that we're going to pay more attention to is the one about the most recent Emerson Hyndman news.
Oh, yeah.
But his email explaining everything he had to do to figure out if Emerson Hyndman was indeed playing, and the fact that he kept getting redirected to the wrong game by the app that he was utilizing was hilarious. So thank you for that, Richie.
So unfortunately, Hyndman was on the receiving end of a 3-0 defeat for Bournemouth. Mm-hmm. But he has since left the club. Do we want to read Rich's report?
Let's do it. I'll take it.
Okay.
So Emerson Hyndman, obviously the 20-year-old center midfielder for Rangers. Emerson will complete the rest of the year with Rangers. Hallelujah, says Richie. Following in the footsteps of Gedion Zelalem, Emerson has joined the Glasgow club, the difference being that Rangers are now back in the SPL this season. Richie says, I don't know how much the squad has changed since last year, but I know they have had some midfield troubles, specifically in regards to Joey Barton. Hopefully he, being Emerson Hyndman, not Richie Garcia, can earn some quality playing time, and I can figure out how to watch those games. We have an answer for you, and that answer, sadly, is Fox Soccer Plus or Fox Soccer to go, only because as far as I could tell, there wasn't much in terms of actually being able to watch them on your TV. It is kind of all going to be app and internet based. The next opportunity to do so will be Motherwell v Rangers on January 28th at 7:30 in the morning. That is their next SPL game.
So we have Fox Soccer to go, right? So we may be able to at least watch and like get an idea of how Hyndman's doing. So even if people don't have subscriptions to Fox Soccer Plus or Fox Soccer to go, we'll be able to offer you some Emerson Hyndman reports.
I am fine with that.
It's worth saying that I think he is an important player for the future of the US national team, and it's just been a rough year or so where he's been unable to get any first-team football. Like, I was watching some highlights of him again and just got reminded what a really, like, quick feet, smart pass and move type of player he is.
Yeah, and it's tough to say because I haven't really watched that much of him because he hasn't been playing, and I didn't watch that FA Cup game. But it's another one where the Twitter sphere and a lot of the reaction I've seen has either been, he was great, I found him really impressive, or he was awful, he's not up to this level. So it's kind of tough to know where he is. Hopefully getting some regular time with Rangers will help us figure that one out.
Well, that's the thing, right? He hasn't got regular time with Fulham, hasn't got regular time with Bournemouth. It's time he got some minutes. It's time Emerson Hyndman got some minutes, and I'm really looking forward to watching that happen. Hopefully.
And I'll say, if we're looking for a silver lining here, and I know that we all care a lot about our specific predictions that you and I make, and I believe I had a prediction about Emerson Hyndman playing fewer than 8 games for Bournemouth. That seems like a solid bet nowadays.
Oh, because now he's gone for the next 6 months. Your prediction's nailed down. So the real winner here is Taylor Rockwell's predictions.
I mean, I think so. I think we're all very excited. We're all very relieved. We know that I don't look like such a laughingstock that is until I revisit these predictions at the beginning of the next Premier League campaign, only to find out that I actually said he'll make over 8 or something like that. I tend to misremember.
All right, second FA Cup-related scouting report comes from William Cunningham. William is scouting Cameron Carter-Vickers, the 19-year-old centre-back for Spurs. Oh, yeah, CCV. William says, CCV made his Spurs FA Cup debut on Sunday in a 2-0 win over Aston Villa. He started and played the full 90. He had 10 clearances, a 91% pass completion percentage, and won 10 aerial duels, which is the same number as the combined Aston Villa team.
That's kind of impressive for a 19-year-old.
It certainly is. And I watched this game, Taylor.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, so the 91% pass completion percentage, a lot of that is just sideways passes to Toby Alderweireld.
Yep.
It's not as if he was threading it. Yeah, as is tradition. I can tell you CCV played in a back 3. So CCV was right centre-back, Alderweireld was centre-back, and Kevin Wimmer was left centre-back. And they were really only up against Gabi Agbanlahor for Aston Villa, and he kind of just stayed central and tried to win a few sort of direct balls. So really CCV didn't have that much to do.
Oh, but see, actually, I didn't know anything about this game other than I knew he started because we got all the tweets and I follow those like updates. So I knew he had played. But that actually makes me really happy because it did seem like when Tottenham were going to the back 3 that maybe Pochettino wasn't entirely sure that CCV could handle it, and it seemed like maybe he was only ever going to get looks when they were in a back four with those two center backs.
Yes,
so
that's true.
If they are experimenting with him as that third center back, then maybe it does mean that he has more faith, and it also means that since he is kind of the third center back, he would be the one to continue to get starting opportunities. So I guess we'll have to wait and see.
We did have Ian Dowie, I think, was the co-commentator, and he had a good observation about Cameron Carter-Vickers, the co-commentator on Fox, which is where I was watching it, on Fox Sports. He actually pointed out that even though we think of Cameron Carter-Vickers as a big dude, right? But he's only 6 feet tall, which is not that tall for a centre-back when you think like Gary Cahill is 6'4", those kinds of guys, right? So Ian Dowie had this good observation that even though he doesn't necessarily tower over people to win balls in the air, Dowie noticed that Cameron Carter-Vickers was doing that very clever centre-back thing of just giving you a nudge, like a physical nudge before the ball comes in. So it's this very mature style of defending, which is kind of cynical, which is to use your body like to win the aerial duel, not just by using your height, but by using those little bumps and nudges to knock you off your game.
Well, see, that makes me really happy. What doesn't make me really happy was the realization that there's no way he's going to get called up by Bruce Arena in March.
Why is that?
Because Arena said in that Facebook Live thing, and nor do I think he should really, unless he maybe starts to start every single game for Tottenham.
Yeah.
Outside of that, Arena said he wants like kind of like proven veterans who are getting playing time. Actually, I don't think he even said that. I think he just said he wants veterans. Basically, he wants people who know how to do it.
Yeah, I mean, and I agree with that, but why does that worry you is my bigger question.
I think just because, and it's mostly because I'm a dummy who buys into media hype, and 3 different articles I read about CCV playing noted that like, oh, and he is still a dual national, and it is possible, like England have come calling and have sniffed around a little bit. And it's worth remembering that he has said time and time again that he identifies as American, that he wants to play for the U.S. national team, that that's where his loyalty is. He's already played for them. So I think you pointed out when we discussed this via text that he would have to file a one-time switch.
Yeah.
So that's all worth remembering, because I do think if he does get more experience in playing time, you are going to start to hear more and more of those rumors that, oh, England are calling and he might be interested, especially if he doesn't get a call-up. And the reality is that he's never going to get a call-up for March because Arena wants experience. But maybe there's a phone call where he says, okay, you're not getting it in March, but maybe in the Gold Cup, keep playing well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the bigger thing really is for CCV to get a Premier League debut. Because even though it's great that he played in this FA Cup game, it was a weakened Spurs team, right? There's no Harry Kane. Dele Alli didn't start. It was kind of definitely a second string-ish Spurs team. Right.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, but when has that ever stopped us from wild speculation and wild enthusiasm when it comes to Americans playing soccer?
I still blame Giuseppe Rossi for making all of us paranoid about cap-tying our players.
Correct.
Should we move on to another young American in the TSS scouting network?
Sure. The next one comes from Andy Hollums, scouting Julian Green, a 21-year-old winger for Stuttgart. With the league on winter break, says Andy, Green hasn't had a chance to play for Stuttgart yet. However, Carlo Ancelotti, his former boss, is still singing his praises, stating, quote, I think that in the last 6 months, he improved a lot. I hope that in Stuttgart, he can play with more continuity and show his quality. He has the typical skill set of a center forward. He's very good without the ball. He is so good at finding space and moving behind the defensive line, and he has quality on the ball too, end quote. Now, that's very kind words from Carlo Ancelotti, although when I read this, it was sort of like, hey, Carlo, if you believe that, why'd you sell him?
Yeah, it's kind of very easy to be nice to someone as they're leaving, right? This is like when you let an employee go and you wish them best of luck in their next endeavor.
Exactly. As they're walking out with their box full of stuff in their desk, it's like, hey, man, you did a really good report 3 years ago. Well done.
How about some luck in this endeavor? Keep me on staff.
But yes, I think maybe that's just Carlo being his ever optimistic, charming self. And, sending some kind words to Julian Green, and we will see what happens. Stuttgart, I guess, doing their their mid-season training camp, as are most Bundesliga teams.
Speaking of, there was, we haven't got a scouting report about this, but Wolfsburg, Bundesliga team, were playing in Tampa. They played against the Tampa Bay Rowdies, I think, over the weekend, in a kind of friendly-ish thing called the Florida Cup. McKinze Gaines played for that Wolfsburg team, got himself an assist. Mm-hmm. Young American.
And we know this via Twitter, had some hair as well. I don't know what that hair looks like, but that was the report we got via Twitter.
It was kind of like a big wedge. Yeah, it was very very eye-catching. So I watched a bit of this, just the highlights basically. Gaines played on the right wing in a sort of 4-2-3-1 type system. And I think basically the Tampa left back just went through a wander, and Gaines was suddenly wide open on the outside. So a nice diagonal ball found him, and he easily squared it to set up a goal for his Wolfsburg teammate. But still not bad for a teenager. I believe Gaines is 19. So this is a big deal for him to be playing for, even though it's only what you'd call like a winter warm-up friendly, it's still a big deal for him to make his sort of put his stamp on this Wolfsburg team.
That is very exciting.
Yeah.
What is less exciting is that I still can't say with confidence that his name is actually McKinze, because I feel like it has to be McKinsey, right?
There's a vowel missing there, right?
There definitely is. It's just an E at the end there. There's no IE. But still, I need someone to confirm the pronunciation one way or the other so I can feel more confident, because otherwise we're just going to constantly call him Gaines.
Yeah. Okay, so if there's any McKinze Gaines experts out there, please let us know the correct pronunciation.
I love it. I like it.
One more scouting report in front of me, Taylor.
Yes, sir.
It's from Michael Curry, scouting another American in Germany, Haji Wright, the 18-year-old forward for Schalke U19s. Michael says, I've been keeping an eye on Haji's progress. Thank you, Michael. That's the job of the Scout Network, doing your job. His progress with the Schalke U19 squad, and he's been a pretty consistent contributor. In 13 appearances out of a possible 15 matches, he, Haji Wright, has played 1,083 minutes, scored 6 goals, and provided 8 assists. I like those numbers. Mm-hmm. Michael says that Schalke's head coach, Marcus Weinzieri, was impressed enough to invite Haji to travel with the first team for their winter training in Spain. So this is similar to what happened with McKinze Gaines, right?
Exactly.
The manager commented, a training camp is always a good opportunity to test talented youth players and get to know them. He definitely hasn't travelled just to make up the numbers.
Mm-hmm. And then I think I took that quote out, but I think it ends with, I'm not that kind of guy, is what Weinzieri ended with.
I suddenly like him a lot for that quote.
Yeah. Oh, I like him for bringing Haji Wright along. But yes, also the quote. That's pretty good too.
We have one final bit of young American news, Taylor, although I think you and I seem to disagree about how likely this is to happen.
I was really curious what it was. Yeah, right.
It's an update on the Gedion Zelalem from Arsenal to Dortmund transfer.
Is it, though? Is it?
It's a restating of the Gedion Zelalem Arsenal to Dortmund transfer. Yeah. So it is. ESPN are reporting that they're still reporting that the move for Zelalem from Arsenal to Dortmund is close to completion. The quote from the article, you've cut this out, right, and put it in our notes. Sources close to the player have told ESPN FC that the midfielder is keen on a return to Germany, with his father actually a Dortmund fan.
It also notes the attacking midfielder is out of contract at Arsenal in the summer, and Dortmund believe they can land Zelalem for a cut price fee this month.
So both of the last two things are accurate, right? He's out of contract at Arsenal, which means he could sign a pre-contract now, or if Dortmund wanted him now, they really could sign him for not much, right? Because you don't get much of a transfer fee once you're out of contract. I've just realised that the sources close to the player mean that this is not sources within Borussia Dortmund saying, yeah, we want this guy. It's sources close to Zelalem saying, yeah, I'd like to go there.
Or it's sources close to Zelalem saying, hey, we want Arsenal to consider giving him a contract renewal. Dortmund seemed like a club that would maybe entice Arsenal into being like, no, we don't want to lose him to them. So maybe there's that, or maybe it is just a normal rumor, or maybe he is going to go. I mean, it's tough to say for sure. I think the biggest thing is, as I looked around the interwebs for more notes on this, it was all just stories reporting this, but linking back to the original ESPN article.
That's the only source, right?
It may well be that ESPN have sources and that there is somebody in the Gedion Zelalem camp who is leaking news to ESPN, but that news isn't coming from anywhere else. So it remains to be seen just how likely this move is. I'm
now leaning towards sources close to the player suggest that, it's Zelalem's people trying to sort of agitate for this move. Mm-hmm. Right. And now it could well be that there have been quotes from Dortmund saying, yes, we're definitely interested in him. Yes, he's a player that we want to keep an eye on. I haven't seen them. And I've just missed them. But yeah. And then I also just think that even if he does go to Dortmund, I appreciate your optimism in thinking that maybe he's a replacement for somebody like Julian Weigl if Weigl goes in the summer. Yeah. I think it's more likely that he gets like a short-term deal, plays with the youth team, and has to kind of demonstrate that he deserves to be there. And maybe they're willing, if it's true that Dortmund are interested in him, maybe they're willing to take a punt on him just to see what he's capable of, because it won't be so much money. And if it's not doesn't work out, then it doesn't work out. Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I want to see Zelalem on the field, right? It's time. It's time for Zelalem to be on the field no matter where he is. And I agree with you on that, but I think that's the problem, right? I haven't seen much of Gedion Zelalem, so I can't say for sure, but I would be willing to wager that he is not good enough to be a consistent starter for Borussia Dortmund, at least not yet. So if it were, say, Fortuna Düsseldorf in Bundesliga 2 or something like that, I'd feel a little bit more optimistic and a little bit more excited by that prospect, because maybe that seems a little bit more reasonable that he's going to a lower level Bundesliga or Bundesliga 2 team, or higher level Bundesliga 2 team, that is, and that would make sense that he's an Arsenal cast-off
Arsenal Academy product who maybe now is being looked at by German teams as an opportunity for the future.
Okay, so I guess we'll just keep an eye on that sort of developing story and cross our fingers for the best.
Sounds good to me.
Speaking of, the FIFA Council meets tomorrow.
They sure do.
So I feel like you can't have missed this story. The part of these sort of FIFA awards is that, everybody's gathered. Then the following day, so this Tuesday, the FIFA Council will meet. This is the replacement for the FIFA executive in the restructuring of FIFA. And the FIFA Council will vote on Gianni Infantino's proposal for a 48-team World Cup starting, I believe, in 2026. So unless I've misunderstood this, Taylor, this means that by tomorrow we'll know if this 48-team World Cup is a reality or not.
We will for sure. Unlike the Zelalem one, this one I'm saying is probably pretty accurate in the reporting.
Why do you feel that way?
Because I think it's probably number one of the campaign promises that Gianni Infantino made in order to kind of cultivate support for him, because he is a FIFA representative, excuse me, not a FIFA representative, a UEFA representative. So in order to get the support of smaller countries who, have just as many votes, I think maybe courting them. I have seen reports that it would be Africa and Asia who would primarily benefit in terms of getting more spots. I mean, obviously every federation would, but I think those would be the two to get more than everybody else.
Right, there's a ratio of new spots awarded, right?
Yeah, per capita or percentage-wise or whatever. So I think it's pretty likely that it does expand, because any number of reasons, from, you could argue that the expanded Euros allowed teams like Iceland, for example, to go farther than maybe another tournament would have. Wales, the same. So you could say that aspect of it. You could say it's better just to have more teams competing because it is supposed to be the global tournament. And then I think you can't deny the fact that it's going to mean a lot more money, a lot more money. I think the estimates were some absurd number.
I think it was an extra billion.
Yeah, that
extra
sounds
$1 billion
likely.
in revenue.
Just by expanding. And so I think you kind of can't discredit that, sad as it is, from the decision-making process. And
so I've also read David Gill, who is England's representative on the FIFA Council. He's one of the vice presidents. He apparently is against it but resigned to it, and so much so he's not even turning up for the vote. So that's a big indication. And I saw a quote from, I think his name is Pinnick. He is a Nigerian football administrator. He's not part of the FIFA Council, but he was basically saying, I'll be very surprised if this doesn't happen. Everything we're hearing is that it's definitely going to go through. Mm-hmm. And so I think it will. I'm just not so excited about it, because I feel like the two formats that are most likely to be approved are either that maybe that one game playoff, or more likely the 48 team, 3 teams in a group, 16 group format. Yeah. That seems like the one that's probably going to go through. And that seems like it has its own issues, where if teams end level on points, then you have to do potentially like shootouts to make sure that you know who's going through. And it could just be very confusing. You have that opportunity for games to be really dull, because you could have dead rubbers. You could have teams knowing the results they need to get, having already played the other team. So it could just be a whole lot of problems. That said, I do think I tend to, when it comes to things like major tournaments, be a little bit more of a traditionalist and think like, no, this is how it needs to be. Mm-hmm. Forgetting that it changed in 1998? Yeah, it was 24 teams in 94. Yeah. So I mean, it is just kind of, you could argue that it's just modernization and like keeping up with the times, but I don't know. I have a little bit of wariness, because I think I'm just used to that 4 team in a group format, and it seems to work so well, and I know it so well, so it makes me happy. I'm all for change. I'm all for like, you think so? You are? Yeah, move on, mix it up, see what happens. Why not? So do you have one that you'd prefer? Because the other ones are that you basically just keep it as 4 teams in a group, but then only a certain number of the second place teams go through. And then the other one is a 40-team World Cup with it's like 8 groups of 5 and the 2 go through. So there's all those different varieties in there. I'm okay with the 16 groups of 3. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that could work for me. All right. We'll know more after the vote tomorrow, right? Maybe we'll get more into the details of this after it's inevitably approved. Yes, and I'm on a group messenger thing with former co-hosts Josh and Albert, amongst many others. And Albert did point out on there that it's not really, because one of my fears, I think Josh had the same, was that it means that teams are going to play for a draw in that first game because they can't risk not getting a point. Otherwise, your tournament could basically be over, because you know that then you have to get results in the next 2. Yeah. And Albert's point was like, that's not different from any World Cup. Like, that's how it always is. Like, everybody's always conservative to start for fear of getting eliminated early. Yeah, that's fair.
So again, I think it just comes down to fear of change. Much like Wayne and Garth, I fear change. That's another topical reference for you from Wayne's World from I don't even know how many years ago. Party
on, Taylor. Party on.
Party on, Daryl.
All right, before we get to my interview with Jeff Reuter from 55.1 about the US Soccer's NASL USL decision, we have a sponsor for today's episode, Taylor, and it is SeatGeek. SeatGeek has made buying tickets online for sports and concerts less confusing than it's ever been. They've come along and created an amazing app and website that makes it easier than ever to buy and sell tickets.
That's right. They ensure you get the best possible deal, especially for sold-out events, by doing all the price comparison for you and searching multiple ticket sites to ensure that great deal.
So we've established a tradition on the Total Soccer Show, Taylor. When we do the SeatGeek ad read, one of my favourite things to do is just open the SeatGeek app and basically scroll through and look for events that I might want to attend, especially sold-out events. Yep. I think you're going to be surprised by what I landed on today.
Oh, boy.
I have never been to an NFL game.
Oh,
NFL playoffs are happening right now, right?
They are.
Or they're about to. As I understand it, NFL playoff games sell out fast.
Correct.
So I'm scrolling through and I'm seeing, for example, Seahawks at Falcons, $149. That seems to me good for a sold-out NFL game.
That should be easy for you to get to.
Oh, yeah, there's a travel cost involved, right? Texans at Patriots, Steelers at Chiefs, Packers at Cowboys. If I'm only going to one of these, and it's kind of fantasy camp because I'm actually going to be in Florida next week, but which of these should I go to? Again, it's Seahawks at Falcons, Texans at Patriots, Steelers at Chiefs, Packers at Cowboys.
All right. Actually, I want to flip it around and ask you, based on those, just the team names, knowing that you know, I mean, I know you follow sports, so you know some NFL players, you know some of the teams, you know some of the history a little bit. But I'm just curious, from like, imagine your dad. If your dad saw those team names, which one do you think he would be most likely to pick? Because I think I know, but I'm curious what you'll say.
Just based on team names?
Yes. Just based on like, hey, these are the games we could go see. Which one do you think would be most appealing? And for him or for you or both?
I would say that, and I don't want to offend anyone here because obviously this is based on no knowledge, Packers and Cowboys seem like the most, in some ways, historic teams. Like those are definitely names that you recognize as NFL franchises. But Texans at Patriots sounds the most American. Like if you were just like, you know, the kid in Love Actually who's going to American, just looking for American things. Specifically girls, I guess, mostly. But that's the game he would go to. Texans at Patriots because it sounds super stars and stripes.
Indeed. And if you are a young Englishman coming to the United States, just remember the number one, not all American women look like Victoria's Secret models, as that movie would have you believe. And number two, table doesn't make you sound English. It's one of those words. It sounds the same. I've seen that movie once or twice. See, I would have thought Steelers. I feel like your dad would be like Steelers. That's like a proper English name.
I mean, he did used to work at the steel factory.
There we are. See? So I guess what we've landed upon is that I know your father better than you.
Are you trying to get out of the you recommending a game? Because your NFL knowledge is not as hot as it once was.
I mean, my NFL knowledge is that the two teams I enjoy, the Washington Redskins and the Cleveland Browns, not in the playoffs. So who cares?
Okay, so what have you found on SeatGeek, Tyler?
I have found one closer to home. It's a band called Foxygen. I saw them play at the 930 Club. They're a strange band because if you listen to them like on YouTube or just download an album, they do not sound the way their live performances go. They're really raucous, kind of crazy. They have a backup band, and they're a very good time. But then if you listen to their record, it's all very tame and kind of dreamy, San Francisco, that kind of thing.
It sounds like a Lou Reed tribute band. Whenever I've listened to them I stream them on Spotify a few times, and I've been like, it's a bit like, you know, Lou Reed knockoff. So
yeah, that was not Shots Fired at San Francisco, by the way. That I believe is actually the title of one of their songs.
Okay.
So there you go. Yeah, no, I think you're right that's what it sounds like, the recorded version. But then the live show was just insanity, and maybe that was a one-off because he had some PEDs. Who knows for sure?
PEDs. Is that what they call it these days?
Yeah, either way, they're coming to Richmond in March, so worth keeping an eye on that event.
Okay, so there you go, NFL and Foxygen. Maybe we should start doing a thing where listeners have to vote on which of the events we each have picked they would rather go to.
I think I know the answer for this one.
It could go either way, right? Because some soccer fans are very anti-football.
Would you rather see Captain America Civil War or the low-budget independent film that's just about sadness? I mean, it's your choice.
I mean, I might go low-budget independent on that.
But that's why I had to emphasize about sadness. It's just an hour and a half of an old woman crying.
All right, so if our listeners would like to go to either of these events or any other event they can find with the SeatGeek app, they can get a $20 rebate off their first ticket purchase. Here's what they would need to do to get a $20 rebate. You download the SeatGeek app, you go to the settings tab, you click add a promo code, you enter the promo code TSS for Total Soccer Show, then SeatGeek will send you $20 after you've made your first ticket purchase.
Listeners, I can confirm all that information is correct. So download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code TSS today.
All right, Taylor, up next, my interview with Jeff Reuter. I've already done this interview, so I know what's coming. You don't, but I can tell you this. We're going to get deep in the weeds on the NASL, USL, Division II sanctioning, how it happened, and why US Soccer made that decision. Here's my interview with Jeff.
I'm really happy that you've done this interview because I kept trying to figure out like difference between Division 2 and Division 3, Googling all these different things. And what I kept getting was, did you mean NCAA Division 2, Division 3? And the answer is no, Google, I did not. So thank you, Daryl, for doing the research and doing this interview. So
Jeff Reuter from 55-1, hello there.
Hi, how are you doing today, Daryl?
I'm good, thank you. I want to ask you, first of all, about 55-1. So before we get into NASL, USL, US Soccer, Minnesota United, why is your Minnesota-based website about soccer called 55-1?
That's a question that it probably took me about 3 months of writing for 55-1 to answer. So how it started was that 55-1, the kind of predecessor to it, was called Northern Pitch. And that was part of a series of, you could call them blogs, that were run under a brand called Min-Centric. So it started with like a Twins Daily blog, and then they branched out to the Vikings, the Wild, and then the Minnesota-based one was Northern Pitch.
Okay.
However, ultimately, 4 owners, Wes Burdine, Brian Korstad, Dave Ladig, and Bill Steinross, decided that they wanted to kind of branch off and create their own thing, not be a blog anymore, and turn it into an online soccer magazine, cover a wider scope within Minnesota, and not just limit it basically to Minnesota United. And then be able to go from there and turn it into kind of the preeminent soccer news website for the Minnesota and the upper Midwest eventually. So they broke off. Now, as far as the name itself, we were tossing around a lot of different ideas, and this is one that entirely falls on Wes Burdine, in case you want anyone to target. He did some research and found that 55.1 is the average high temperature in Minnesota across the year.
Okay.
That's obviously Fahrenheit, not Celsius.
Yeah.
But, so ultimately decided that's where it would come in from. And then if you look, and this is really stretching, this is Brian Korstad's contribution to it. I'm just going to point fingers on this one. The angle created when you go from the center circle to the corner flag to the center of the goalpost is about 55 degrees. So...
That sounds like a worked backwards apologetics kind of version of it.
It is, isn't it? No, honestly, I mean, it did take a while. I think we're far enough out. We're about 8 months in where I can say this. It's really grown on me. Some people will say, it's like 442 has the numbers thing, 538 does the number thing. So there's something trendy to it. But there is actually a reason we chose 55.1 as the number to use in the title.
So if the site first came to my attention in a major way over the last couple months, I want to say starting early December, when US Soccer started announcing that they were going to put a delay on the Division II sanctioning for NASL, USL, and we started seeing stories popping up on 55.1. Sort of, you would have the news even before it was announced a lot of the time, and you would have a lot of details about why this decision for Division II sanctioning was being delayed. So really, I want to first of all say sort of thank you to you guys, because I want to say Empire of Soccer, Dave Martinez blog, had some news, but you guys were one of the main sources where we could try and figure out what on earth was going on behind closed doors.
Thank you.
So, I mean, I want to ask about what do you have an idea of like why there was so much secrecy around this decision and why it took so long? And can you give, I'm assuming you can't name sources, but can you give me any insight into how you guys were able to be sort of ahead of it all and to let us know what was happening there?
Sure. I'll take those in order then. As far as why there was so much secrecy behind it, I think that there was, there's a lot at stake, obviously. If this is the survival or the failure of the league, any amount of information that got out from the league side, anything that they knew or anything that was in the works, could really affect public perception of the league's strength.
The league being NASL.
Correct. Thank you. Yeah, the NASL. And then in turn also affect how people look at the USL, and suddenly bandwagon fans might be leaving. I don't know if there are a ton of neutrals who just follow the NASL without a club affiliation of any kind,
right.
But suddenly those fans could look and say, not necessarily the strongest product. Like if you're just a neutral Canadian fan and you're deciding Ottawa left for the USL, but we've got Edmonton, suddenly you just become a bandwagon. I don't know. There's a sense of having that fan culture. And I think one of the things that actually leads into the second one, which is how do we even find this out, is that the NASL is such a close-knit group of clubs, and that people within the clubs, there's a level of respect. And I don't know. I'm not going to say it's like a family or anything. It's a very disjointed family if it was one. But there's a lot of communication between us. I mean, right. the Carolina people and the Fort Lauderdale people, or the new San Francisco people, and the Minnesotans, we'll all talk and just kind of try to get a sense of where this league is going. Because, like you said, there's so much secrecy as far as what goes on in the league's office that any bit that we can piece together, and then this goes beyond just journalists. Obviously, most of these would come from, I can't name sources on these. But
I wouldn't ask you to, because I don't want anything to get ruined.
Yeah, but I will say it isn't like there's just a AOL group chat board of journalists across the NASL. It does go much, much deeper than that.
Okay, so this is more like crowdsourcing almost from the various, I assume, NASL teams that you were sort of in contact with.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of connection building. There's a fair amount, not necessarily of the fan side, but there's a fair amount of traveling when it comes to people within the club, or people who cover the club. They will actually go to these other cities. And so you make the connections there when they're in town, or you get in touch and say, hey, I'm working on a piece. It sounds like, Matt Fondy, when he was transferred, the former USL Golden Boot winner. And at first he had signed with Jacksonville and ultimately was sold to Carolina. And so it would be talking to people in Carolina saying, hey, I've heard about Fondy. And then you start talking, and suddenly you talk about other stories. So it just happens organically, I guess.
So I'm not sure if you know this, but I'm in Richmond, Virginia, home of the Richmond Kickers. So we're a USL town in many ways, right? So people here are very, very pleased that USL is now sort of provisionally Division II sanctioned, because it's a step up, and it's something that I know the USL has been aiming for a while now. Can I assume that on the NASL side, the people are happy with this decision?
It's kind of funny. I ran a poll that night when they announced the split decision on Friday. And I said, it was a 24-hour poll on Twitter. And I just said, I know it doesn't feel like there's a winner here, but if you had to say who won this split decision, who would you say? And adding absolutely no security and kind of calmness to one side or the other, with over 250 votes in, it was a perfect 50-50 split. And it was just the epitome. And so I think ultimately everyone decided that Ted Westervelt was the winner of the split decision here. But NASL people, look, Daryl, it's not necessarily about the fact that it got D2. It's the fact that it exists.
Right.
And a lot of these decisions, if you look at the Cosmos purchase, if you look at Fort Lauderdale's potential investors, if you look at Jacksonville being able to be propped up by the NASL, all of those were contingent on at least maintaining partial Division II status. And so now that they're able to retain that, the league exists. If it had fallen to D3, there are a lot of clubs that then would have been able to leave for lesser exit fees.
Right.
And
so
that
D3 meant the death of NASL, basically, right?
D3 meant the death of NASL. Unsanctioned, just kind of going rogue, would have also been the death of it. But ultimately, the fact that it was able to hold on to that second status saved the league, really.
So it seemed as well like a lot of the NASL owners, especially obviously the teams that stayed, seemed like pretty committed to NASL. I know that you wrote a story, or somebody, I can't remember if it was you or Wes, wrote a story on 55.1 about how there would be sort of exit fees if you left NASL for USL. But to what extent was it the NASL owners who were sort of committed to keeping the league alive? And if so, why were they so committed to keeping the league alive?
That's a great set of questions here. Wes was the one who talked about the exit fees, and in his piece, he referred to the timeline that was set out in 2014 when Rayo OKC entered the league. The league first published and then ended up retracting, but we held on to it as a PDF, as all good journalists should do.
Yeah, good work.
And so looking through that, there's a timeline. As the previous season before leaving the league unfolds, the further you get into that season, or maybe there's a better way to frame it, the closer you get to that next season, the more you have to pay. So when Minnesota United bought out of NASL when they're going to MLS, this happened in June or July, and they paid $500,000. Meanwhile, when Ottawa and Tampa Bay left NASL for USL, it was in September or October. It was announced. It was crazy late in the end of the season, if not the end of the season, actually, afterward. And so that was $1.5 million per club. So it was only increasing and increasing. And if clubs had left in late December or early January, and suddenly, like, let's say Miami FC, who has absolutely no interest in USL, so I feel confident using them as an example.
Right.
If Miami FC suddenly decided, you know what, we want to go to the USL model, they would have had to pay $2.5 or $3 million in order to leave this close to the season.
And so is that what kept the owners with NASL, or were the NASL owners, and I'm thinking of, say, the guys at Indy 11 who seem to be running, a really successful team, were they committed to the NASL model anyway, or were they constrained by the exit fee? I guess what I'm really getting at here is it seems to me that USL was set to be the winner, but the owners seemed to stay loyal to the NASL even when it was down to like 6 teams. So I think I'm really asking sort of, why were they so loyal to the NASL? Sort of what's the benefit to them of sticking with a league that looked to be in trouble?
Sure. Well, there was a point in mid-December where we had very good sourcing that the NASL was 99% likely to die.
Yeah.
Where every owner was just kind of getting distraught. They were talking about maybe even pooling together and saying we're going to split the exit fees equally so that no one team is shorted the $3 million, whatever. Yeah. But ultimately what ended up happening, and this is something that was announced this morning on the 9th of January, that Bill Peterson has been let go as the commissioner of NASL.
I believe amicably parted ways is the phrase they used.
That's a very, very nice way to put it. It's something that I reported in the week, I believe it was following Christmas, where the owners met as just kind of a collective. They didn't tell Peterson about this meeting. They didn't give him the notes afterwards. They didn't send him a Skype request or anything for it. And they met and they just sat down in a room. And it's believed that this was emotionally led by Peter Wilt. I'm not saying that he was necessarily the one who saved the league, but he was the one who said, look, we've got a club in Chicago that's ready to go in 2018. We've got 2 or 3 other clubs that look like feasibly they could exist in 2018. This isn't necessarily like Bill Peterson, who was telling Sports Illustrated there were 40 groups of owners who were looking to join the NASL, which he did when Tampa Bay and Ottawa were about to leave.
I cringed a little bit when I read that, because that seemed like someone sort of desperately trying to overcompensate for what had just happened.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's one thing. There are very few people that I've spoken to who actually were able to look at that in face value and say, you know what, I could see there being 40. Overcompensation is a perfect phrase for it. I think a lot of it was puffing out chests, and ultimately a lot of owners had felt like they were being misled by these numbers because they were hearing the same numbers in private meetings with Peterson.
Right.
And so then they were being told, hey, I understand Tampa Bay and Ottawa might be on the out. We definitely know that Minnesota United is on the out, but I can promise you that Raleigh is looking at it. I can promise you that there are 5 teams in California looking at it. We're going to get it back in Atlanta, even though there's the MLS project opening there next year. There are all of these, just grandstanding from the commissioner that this league was growing at a rate that had never been seen in American soccer. The USL is hitting something of a boom and a fever pitch as far as expansion. But what Peterson was boasting as far as the NASL's potential was far greater than anything that we've seen in any league so far.
So is it fair to say that the owners essentially banded together to save their own league and set it off in a new direction? Because I noticed as well in the release today that they talked about sort of essentially a more modest and sensible approach with an expansion vetting committee and a lot of things like that.
Exactly. Yeah, this went to becoming the owners' league. And I think that in a lot of ways, for the owners who stuck with the league, that was a massive appeal. They got a sense. They weren't just buying into someone else's business model. They were forming what the business model they were already into would become. And I think that there's something that's very admirable about that. I mean, look, we all know what MLS is at this point. There aren't many surprises after 21 years. Player acquisition, sure, that's always surprising in a lot of ways. But as far as the business model of it, you know what you're getting with a single entity. With USL, once they started this affiliation partnership with MLS, you kind of know what you're getting there. It's a little bit more of either the affiliation side, or it's kind of the grassroots. It's your local club for the markets that either want to go into MLS or aren't necessarily viable MLS markets. And so that's a very sustainable model. But with the NASL, it's trying to be the second best entertainment league in the United States as far as soccer is concerned. And so it's a very unique sort of pivot as far as where the league is operating with the NASL. And so for the owners to be able to take control back and be able to look and say, we don't necessarily agree with a lot of this rapid vetting process that was going on. If you look at some of recent purchases, the Rio purchase stands out like a sore thumb in that regard. And instead, we're able to look, we'll actually have some say in this is the right ownership group, this is the right market, and this is the right timeline. I think there's a lot of that was very appealing as far as them keeping their loyalty to the NASL.
One question that, before we talk about the future, because I want to talk about what happens next with this sort of co-Division 2 provisional sanctioning, which, raises all kinds of questions, just saying that sentence. I'm interested in sort of why you guys at 55-1 still care about NASL, because obviously the team that you sort of support has moved upwards and onwards to Major League Soccer, right? So, right. And again, this is me coming from, I think this is a thing of like full disclosure and accepting my own biases. Like, I want USL to succeed because I'm in a USL town, and it seemed to me that sort of making USL the Division 2, and almost maybe if NASL stopped interfering, USL is more successful. So I want to sort of look at that from the flip side, someone who's been in an NASL town for the last few years, and sort of what that looks like from your perspective.
Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. First off, there are some, we mentioned Empire Soccer, Neil Morris in Carolina deserves a shout out too. And there are a few other writers who do an exceptional job covering the NASL in markets that are still in the NASL.
Yeah.
That said, and we do, 55-1 has gotten some slack for this in the past 6 months or so, because I also had spearheaded for 55-1 the announcement that the Fort Lauderdale Strikers weren't paying their players on time.
Right.
When that all happened during the summer, and is still happening, by the way.
Right.
And so if you're looking at it, I mean, we have very little to lose in a way, and we're in a very unique position in that regard, where we still have connection. We still have some sort of emotional investment. Look, ultimately, as long as people are getting paid, and people, or the markets are being run well and the clubs are being run well, more soccer is always better.
Yeah.
And I think that the NASL and the USL have very different kind of credos and very different end goals as far as what they do with their league. So I think it's possible that both leagues can actually survive, and more than just survive, but flourish if it's done the right way. As far as why 55-1 is still interested, I mean, sometimes we'll hear these stories, and, if it's something in Fort Lauderdale that we're hearing, people who are who have closer connections to Fort Lauderdale might not want to report on it, because that'll be something of a black eye on the reputation of,
right. Don't want to burn any bridges, right?
Exactly. And I'm not going to say that we don't worry about any bridges being burnt anymore in the NASL, but I think that we have a very unique position in the fact that we aren't necessarily covering the NASL week in, week out as far as game recaps, or trying to ask to talk to players, coaches, what have you, about on the field things. So we're if we have confident sourcing, if we think it's a story that really needs to be reported, and ultimately it's going to help people's lives improve, like the thing in Fort Lauderdale, putting the pressure on, because these are people with families who don't have health insurance suddenly, who aren't getting paid on time and are getting paid 50% of what they were promised, which is absolutely, that's not something I can fathom, working and then suddenly getting 50% of what you'd agreed upon with your employer.
Yeah.
If we're in a situation where we can do something like that, yeah, of course.
So what do you make of the sort of provisional designation of both NASL and USL being Division 2? Like, for example, do you have any insight on what provisional means? And does it mean that eventually they'll make a different decision down the line? Or is it there for both teams to hit D2 status in the near future, like permanent Sure. D2 status?
Sure. It's provisional in a sense that you will get D2 status if you hit these benchmarks. And there are some very specific benchmarks that haven't been announced publicly yet. From what I've been led to believe, and this is something that I think I've already tweeted out, so I'm cool saying it. The NASL's main benchmark is you have to have 12 sustainable clubs that have outlooks that I said sustainable, but I mean, these aren't clubs that you just prop up and you say, yeah, we have a club in Oklahoma City that we put up for 1 year and then folded, or we bought Atlanta back from the Silverbacks ownership, we propped it for 1 year and then it folded. These are clubs that actually have trajectories of success, and there need to be 12 of those. I haven't heard the exact timeline, whether that's before 2018, before 2019, what have you, but they ultimately need to get those numbers back into double digits and then show signs that they'll be able to grow from there with those 12 as the anchor clubs.
Can we assume that one of the benchmarks would be, for example, pay your Fort Lauderdale players and staff?
Yes, pay the Fort Lauderdale players and staff. Pay the New York Cosmos staff that wasn't paid fully. Pay out your vendors who haven't been getting their checks necessarily either. There's a lot that's unresolved with this, Daryl, and it's unfortunate because I think a lot of people are looking at it and saying the league survived. The league got D2. It must mean everything was fixed. There's a lot that needs to be fixed at this point. And it's an article that I'm working on that I'm going to have up probably tomorrow morning regarding some specificities with Fort Lauderdale, with Jacksonville, with New York. So that's in the works as well. But yeah, there are still things that need to be done. And if those weren't resolved, it's pretty safe to say the Federation would not grant that D2 status. If you're looking at the USL, then I think there are a lot of clubs that are unimpressed. There are clubs that are successful in the USL, certainly. I mean, we all know the names of them. You could say Richmond's also another one of the successful ones that doesn't necessarily get as many shouts as the Cincinnatis and Sacramentos of the world.
Right.
But I think that if you're looking beyond that, you see affiliates drawing 500 fans per 2 games, and then a league final that ultimately is both affiliates. You see clubs that are practicing in public parks because they don't have a proper field to be training on. You see clubs that don't have locker rooms and they're actually just changing in their cars before training. There's a lot of infrastructure work that needs to be done. And a part of this, like we talked about earlier, is because of how rapidly the USL was expanding. And so I think that a part of it was, this is a great market for us to have a club. This is a market that, frankly, NASL could have used. If USL can do it quicker at a cheaper expansion fee, which was the case, I think it still might be the case, and we can do it what we believe to be the right way, great, let's go for it. But I think that not necessarily all the infrastructure as far as stadia, as far as training facilities, as far as club organization and hierarchies, I think a lot of that still needs to be sorted out. And so before you could grant USL D2 status, I think the majority of clubs need to be much closer to that. Because right now you could look and say, there are 6 or 8 clubs that definitely deserve to be called D2 clubs, but the league isn't quite there yet.
So in your understanding, is this the provisional part of this, which I feel like a lot of people have chosen not to focus too heavily on? It's been more like, yay, D2 all round. Is there an opportunity for both leagues to meet the benchmarks and then we just have 2 D2 leagues and no D3 league and that's it? There's
always a chance.
That doesn't seem like it's the plan, right? It seems like it's a more ideal situation is to have a more sort of stratified, easier to understand pyramid.
A true pyramid, right. And not necessarily in a fluid pyramid, but you can, when you look at pyramids, if you look to the pyramids of Giza, you can tell which one is the first layer, which one's the second layer. You know, it's very distinct. And so I think that's something it sounds obvious, but that's something to keep in mind here is you can't necessarily just have 2 alongside each other and then drop down to the 4th division. So the goal for the Federation has always been 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. But if both look, I don't think that both leagues are going to perfectly meet the targets that were set out by this provisional status in time for the next sanctioning decision.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be a matter of who has fewer waivers to be passed, who's closer to it, and who do we think is actually going to fully hit that sooner, because they certainly won't be ready by the time they have to come to this final decision, just like they weren't ready when they had to make this decision, which they put off for another month and a half and ultimately actually have delayed from the original 7 to 10 days that they announced in November to now a year.
Yeah, that's really what this is, right? It's a delay that keeps everybody in business as much as possible, but like kicks the can in terms of making a decision.
Yeah, this is basically like you're coming back for your 6th interview for a job, except for your interview is basically come work for us for a year so that we can see if you're someone we want to hire.
An internship, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
So the final question I have is something that we get asked a lot, is why does it matter whether you're Division 2 or Division 3?
Puffing of chess, I think, is a part of it. I think that there is some glory that comes with the second division or with the third division. It felt strange, at least the USL clubs that I've spoken to felt a little bit odd being so closely linked to MLS and being seen as something of a minor league, like a AAA baseball to Major League Soccer in a way.
Right.
And yet still being called the third division behind the NASL, especially when they looked and they said, well, we're more sustainable than this. From the NASL side, they looked at it and said, yeah, but look at all of these MLS affiliates. Look at all these clubs that can't even draw players or draw fans, to their games. We have a better product because we're just closer to appearing to be a more sustainable league. So I think for both of them, it was kind of who's the golden child between the two of them,
right.
And ultimately trying to impress the parents, who I guess oddly in this point is Sunil Gulati. So that I think ultimately that comes to it is just some viability within their own markets, some respect points from the outside world, and easily identifiable.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jeff. I want to ask you also, before we go, a little bit about, not Atlanta United, Minnesota United.
Oh, yeah, I read about them too.
So obviously MLS season is coming closer and closer. The reason I mentioned Atlanta is because I've got here in my notes that, Atlanta seem to be getting all the glory in terms of them making all the right roster choices. That's the feeling that people seem to have. Mm-hmm. But I've been watching this Minnesota roster fill out, and I see, for example, I think late last week there was the announcement that Miguel Ibarra and Christian Ramirez were returning. I see Colin Martin has been signed. That's a player I'm kind of familiar with. Played for the Kickers for a little while in DC. And also, Joseph Greenspan is a name that was on my radar, I think, when he signed for Colorado, but was with the Navy still, and now he's back. So am I right in thinking that Minnesota are slowly but surely putting a good roster together?
I completely agree with you on that one.
Yeah.
If I remember right, wasn't Greenspan in the DC United U23s for a while too? I think he actually, was a Virginia kid in himself. And so Martin and Greenspan show one type of player that Minnesota's been acquiring, which it's almost, I kind of want to call it like the Mike Grella reclamation story, where you look at these players and they weren't in the right places. They weren't getting the minutes that they needed to develop. In Martin's case, it was because he was loaned out and because he was blocked by like the likes of Luciano Acosta, which is totally understandable.
Right.
For Greenspan, he had naval duties and now he's bumped to the reserves. So now he has much more time to focus on his professional career. But both of them had...
weirdly, if you want to play soccer, the Navy Reserves is the place to be. If you want to play first team soccer.
Who knew, right? Yeah, exactly. If you want to play for the first team, you are a reserve. But if you look at it, both of those are low risk, high reward types of players. Martin was seen as a potential... I don't know. You would probably be able to attest to this better, but I always thought that he had the potential to be every bit as effective as Harry Shipp had been during his first 2 years in Chicago. A good distributor, someone who could play as a true number 10.
That's what he always looked like to me when he played for the Richmond Kickers, but he was coming and going a lot, if that makes sense. Like he'd come down, play a couple of games, then he'd go back to the DC team, I think, because they needed to fill out a roster. Then we wouldn't see him again for a few weeks. So I never really saw him have a good long stretch of games, if that makes sense.
And I don't think that he's ever had that kind of good long stretch in his career. He played most in his rookie season with DC, if I remember, but and then also this last year with Richmond, So I think that he's a player who, if he's able to get the minutes, he's playing under Adrian Heath, who is an attacking-focused coach who highly values number 10s. Obviously, he deployed Kaká at his last job. I don't think, and this is no slight to Colin Martin, I don't think he's Kaká, but I think that there's a lot of value to be had there. Greenspan, Amos McGee, who's coming, thank you for Amos McGee, by the way, from DC United to Minnesota United as their director of player personnel, went ahead and told us that Greenspan, when he was leaving college, was the best college center back prospect he had ever scouted. Oh, wow. So I think that there's a lot to be said, and also he's 6'6", and if nothing else, there's always going to be a spot for those just purely physical, tall, able to win any headers in the box and keep strikers like Fernando Adi at bay. There will always be a spot for those kind of guys in MLS. You look at the second type of acquisition that they've been making lately. You look at the trade for Johan Venegas, bringing him in. You talked about Ibarra. Christian Ramirez is another player who I wouldn't fall asleep on if I were you. And Francisco Calvo, the center back who used to play for Saprissa. and does feature also for the Costa Rican national team like Venegas does.
Yeah.
All of those players, and then you can include an expected signing that I reported on last week of Vadim Demidov, who's a former Norwegian international center back. These are players who, again, they're not Kaká, they're not Luciano Acosta for that matter, but these are players who are entering or in their prime at positions that are often overlooked by MLS franchises and are really savvy pickups. Neither Ibarra nor Calvo are designated players, though with the transfer fees attached to both of them, they could have been for other clubs who didn't have as much allocation money as Minnesota gets as an expansion club. So there are a lot of really savvy business decisions that go into these players, and suddenly United still has all three of their, or Minnesota United, I suppose I've talked about DC and Atlanta in this segment. Minnesota United hasn't used a designated player slot yet.
Do you know, was Venegas signed before or after he sort of demolished John Brooks in that World Cup qualifier? Was that already in the works, or is that part of the reason he was signed?
Venegas, he was brought in, the way that they actually acquired him, they've been talking with Montreal about him for months leading up to the expansion draft, but they traded Colin Warner to Montreal, or sorry, not Colin Warner, Chris Duval, their first pick, the right back who used to be with New York Red Bulls. They traded him to Montreal for Johan Venegas. And this is after he'd absolutely demolished, like you said, John Brooks and the rest of the U.S. national team. But he's a player that Adrian Heath had been looking at since his days in Orlando. It's a player that Manny Lagos and Amos McGee had been looking at as a piece that they would really want once they went to MLS. And so all three got in a room, showed their short list of players that they wanted to get. Johan was the top of their list total, and then they looked, okay, how do we bring him in? Montreal also lost Donny Toya, who was their starting right back in the expansion draft, so they're able to trade Chris Duval, fill a position of need for Montreal, and bring in Johan Venegas to most likely fill in as kind of a number 10 or a second striker, which is his most comfortable position.
My final question is about Adrian Heath. What's the mood like among Minnesota fans? Because I know, for example, he's kind of struggled with Orlando as an expansion team. So are there any doubts about his ability to put together a competitive expansion team?
I will say at first, people were very unimpressed and uninspired by the potential hiring of Heath when his name was first floated out there by, I think it was Empire Soccer, actually, because they looked purely at the record. Okay, he was fired in an expansion job in the last club that went from a lower division to MLS and saw it as too close to home and didn't want to see the same thing happen with Minnesota. So then the more digging that I did on it, they were just behind DC United in 2015 for a playoff spot, ended up going to the last week of the season, which is nothing to sneeze at for an expansion club. Then after this, his ownership fired all of his assistant coaches who'd been with him since the USL days out from under him and hired his replacements themselves. So they didn't have any, he didn't have any familiarity with his coaching staff. Key players left. The owners would call him up anytime he benched Kaká, even if he was unhealthy, because they wanted to play their marquee player. And so ultimately it went from being kind of his dream situation to a situation he couldn't recognize.
Right.
Now, so then you fast forward to December when he was hired and announced. It's a situation that he's been through. He's helped build a roster and helped get together an expansion club on a very short timeline. So he's not fazed by this. He's a coach who likes to play an attacking brand of football, which for the two major holdovers from the NASL days and reuniting, in the case of Miguel Ibarra and then Christian Ramirez being the other, he's a coach who will be able to deploy both of them at their best positions and in their strongest style of play. But he also had learned from those Orlando days, and I think it's something everyone could see, the defense was awful.
Yeah.
And for a club that would send the fullbacks up in attack, it would basically leave the number 6 and the 2 center backs on an island against counterattacks. And so he's learned from that. He's brought in players who help fix that. This Vadim Demidov is a 6'2" center back who's absolute no nonsense, a very physical player, very brave, and is entirely defense minded. He's not a player who's going to suddenly break towards the box and try to win a header in the run of play. So you've got an anchor back there. I think that he can be a very successful starter in MLS. He's 30 years old, and right now he's the elder statesman of the club, assuming that the club is able to finalize the deal with him. So I think Heath's learned from a lot of his follies that went on in Orlando, and if anything, his experience in Orlando actually makes him a better option for Minnesota than most of the other coaches who are floated across their wire.
Okay, yeah, that's a great answer. All right, final question, and I'll keep promising a final question. The Super Draft is, I believe, Wednesday. Minnesota has first pick, I believe. Who do you think they're going to take?
On Friday, I think that they're going to take Jeremy Ibabise.
Ibabise, okay. I can see why. I understand why. I wish it was Jackson Ewell, just to have that sort of, not homegrown, but local player.
Oh, no doubt. He's beloved by the Minnesota fans. He's actually trained with Minnesota United during the past 2 summers when he's been back from school. So he's familiar with the organization. I just think that there's a higher upside with Jeremy Ibabise that you would be able to get. And so I think the club is looking and saying, look, we have the first pick. We have to take the best player. He's the best player. Heath developed Kyle Larin, developed Dom Dwyer. If he has Christian Ramirez and Jeremy Ibabise to develop, even better. That said, the club also has the 23rd and 25th pick once you look towards the second round, having acquired the Chicago Fire's second round pick in that Juninho deal so that they could get him in the allocation order. So they have 2 of the first 3 picks in the second round. They have a unprecedented amount of allocation money that they're able to send and a lot of other future considerations. I think that there's a chance that they trade back into the top 6 or 8 picks into the first round so that they can take Jackson Ewell specifically.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I wrote a piece about some of the last similar first round pick swaps that have been done for 55-1 with this kind of in mind. So definitely check that out if you're interested in seeing what other clubs have had to give up to get back into the top 8. But yeah, I think it's possible.
Okay, I would encourage all of our listeners who are Minnesota United fans and all of our listeners who are just general soccer fans then, 551.com. It is the annual average high temperature in Minnesota. Have I got that right?
Yeah, you've got that right. 55.1.
Sorry, that's the website. I apologize. 55.1. Totally. I know you guys also have a podcast as well.
Yeah, so Wes, who we've mentioned a few times, who also listens to your show, he and I co-host the 55-1 podcast. We're not very creative as far as changing the name on that one. But yeah, we'll record that tonight. It's a look. We spend the first 15, 20 minutes going through the good, the bad, and the weird in American-based football, whether that would be something in MLS, something in NASL, USL, or Bob Bradley getting fired. We talked about that a lot. Things like that. So we cover that in the beginning, and then, yeah, we'll give you 25, 30 minutes of Minnesota United-based content before taking listener questions at the end.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. I really appreciate it.
Hey, not a problem. Thanks for having me, man.
Thanks again to Jeff Reuter for joining me to talk NASL, USL, and US soccer. Thank you to Taylor for joining me earlier on, and thank you, listener, for joining us to listen. We'll be back with another Total Soccer show on Tuesday.